It's Our Story. Colleen Starkloff, St. Louis, Missouri.
I fell in love in an institution. I did. I fell in love in an institution with a patient. My story.
This is a famous girl story. Girls always love this question. It finds that my wife is always having this question: is how did you meet?
How did you meet?
And you girls have seen it, got this down to an art that you really enjoy talking about it. It seems.
We do. That's a
Yes.
well. It's a fun story. A lot of people. I enjoy telling it, and
Well,
people.
There you go.
Okay.
We're listening.
My big chance. Okay. I was educated in physical therapy at St. Louis University, and I graduated from there in 1970. I had heard of a place called St. Joseph Hill Infirmary, which was a nursing home about 40 or 50 miles, I guess, outside of St. Louis, which is where I grew up. And so my parents had moved to a farm in Catawissa, Missouri, which was near St. Joseph Hill. And a couple of years before I graduated, my sister took a job at St. Joseph Hill as a nurse assistant or nurse's aide during the summer when she was home from college one year. And now I'm about, I guess, a junior in physical therapy at St. Louis University about this time. So my sister takes this job, and she comes home one day and she starts talking about this guy who she met named Max Starkloff, who is he's quadriplegic, and he lives in this nursing home, and he's a young person, and she starts talking about him. And I get fascinated at first because here's somebody with a spinal cord injury, and I just kind of learned about that in school. So from a clinical point of view, I'm sort of curious about what she has to say. The only quads I'd ever seen were sort of laying flat in the hospital and, newly injured. So what did I know? So anyway, she starts talking about this guy, and he sounds pretty fascinating, what she's telling me about him. And so one day, periodically she'd come home and she'd talk about this Max Starkloff. And so I'm getting kind of interested. Now, one day she came home and she said, Max asked me out. And I said, oh, that's an interesting concept. He wants to go out with her. And my sister was hot. I mean, very pretty, very, very, very attractive. Really a knockout. And she had no problems getting dates. I was not my sister. And she said, he asked her out, and I said, well, are you going to go with him? And she said, no. And suddenly out of my mouth popped, why not? And she said, well, because he might get interested in me. And again, out popped, well, so what? And she said, well, I'd have to turn him down. And I said, why? And she said, because he's disabled. And I said, what's that got to do with anything? Now, I didn't think about what I was saying, I just said it. And I'm glad that was my attitude. It was spontaneous, and that was my attitude. And I'm glad I felt that way. I'm real glad, because about a year later, well, then I also heard about him through one of my instructors, who, as it turns out, had been his physical therapist when he was injured. And she was still a nun, and she was still a physical and an occupational therapist, and she was teaching at St. Louis U, where I was. And anyway, so she told me a little bit about him, and he sounded interesting. So then, a year later, I graduate, or 2 years later, whatever it was, and I take this job at St. Joseph Hill Infirmary, where Max lives. And I'd never seen him. I'd just only heard about him, and only a little bit from my sister. And I'm standing in the hallway with the outgoing physical therapist, and here comes this guy wheeling down the hall in a motorized wheelchair. Now, this was in 1973, and I had never seen a motorized wheelchair. And so here comes this guy with his arm hooked around the back of it, and his hair is slicked back. Apparently, he just had his hair shampooed, and his hair was like down to his shoulders. So he goes wheeling by, and I noticed him because he had this very handsome face, and he looked like he might be quadriplegic. Again, back to this clinical diagnosing of what somebody looks like. And anyway, the therapist who I was talking to, who was orienting me to St. Joseph Hill, we were just talking, and this guy goes by, and I said, "Who is that?" And he said, "Oh, that's Max Starkloff." And I thought, "Oh, that's Max Starkloff. Okay, not too bad." So then then I guess it was about a week later when I actually came on and started working, I hear the bell from the elevator door opening out in the hallway outside my office, and I hear this creak, 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 and here comes this fella in a motorized wheelchair. Well, now the hair is dry. It's not all slicked back, and it sort of frames his face, and it's longish, which was the trend back in the mid-'70s. And here is this to die for handsome guy sitting there, and he says, "Hi, I'm Max Starkloff. Is Jan here?" And I thought, oh, va-va-voom. Okay, no, Jan's not here right now. And he said, "Oh, well." I said, "Can I help you?" And he said, "Oh, well, when she comes up, would you tell her that I'm looking for a ride into town, and I wanted to know if she could drive me because I'm going to have lunch with my mother on Saturday, and I need somebody to drive me into town." So I said, "Oh," and so we just started chatting, and I said, "Say, you know my sister Mary Kelly?" "Oh, yeah," he said. So we chatted, and he, "Oh, you're her sister," and blah, blah, blah. Well, we talked, and then he went back to the elevator, and I thought, don't be a dope. So I went out to the elevator, and I said, "Well, say, if you need a ride into town, if you need somebody to drive you Saturday, I could do that. I'm not doing anything Saturday." He goes, "Oh, okay, well, that's great. That would be wonderful." Well, and we made the time and whatever. Well, I later found out that that was just a baloney thing. He was up there to check out the new therapist, which, of course, was very flattering. I, of course, thought he was pretty cool. So we started talking, and one thing led to another, and before you know it, we were dating, and then before you know it, we were seriously talking about getting married. And good for me that I questioned my sister and wanted to know why she thought that was not okay. Because I didn't know that I didn't think that I didn't know that it was okay with me to date somebody or to fall in love with somebody who had a disability, but I knew it then.
The It's Our Story project is a national effort to make disability history public and accessible. Visit us at www.itsourstory.org or on the It's Our Story project YouTube channel.